If someone tells you that they love you, but they usually treat you really badly, do they really love you? If somebody hurts you and asks for forgiveness, and you forgive them, and then they go back and they do the same thing over again, were they really sorry? If the coach says that you're an asset to the team, but he never plays you, are you really an asset? Emerson famously said, "Your actions speak so loudly, I cannot hear what you're saying." And it brings up the point that talk is cheap. It's really easy to say things that you don't necessarily mean. It's what you actually do that shows what you really believe. It's what you actually do, not what you just say, that is most important. And that's going to help us understand what's going on in a slightly confusing passage in the book of James today. So we're in James chapter 2, verses 14 through 26. It's a bit long, so stay awake. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such a faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. But someone will say, "You have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. You believe that there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do, and not by faith alone. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. So there is a controversy in this passage. And there's a couple of verses in here that are the most controversial verses in the book of James, and probably the most controversial verses in the entire Old Testament. And it's pretty much verse 17. Faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by actions, is dead. Now, the translators have nuanced this a little bit. The old translation was just simply, faith without works is dead. And it's controversial because it seems to contradict what the Apostle Paul has said about faith and works. Paul picks this up in two different places. First, in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it's the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. And then in Romans 3:28, for we maintain that a person is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. So there's this whole thing. I mean, the entire Reformation is founded on the belief that there is nothing that you and I can do to earn the favor of God. We are saved simply by God's grace through faith, not by anything that we have done. So it seems like James is saying, not so much. It really is about what you do. And that's what the controversy is all about. Now, there's a couple of dangers in this passage. The first is to focus on the controversy and to miss James's point, to just kind of decide which side that you land on, faith or works, and miss what James is really trying to say. There's a further danger in assuming that Paul is more inspired than James. We believe that the whole Bible is inspired by God, but it's very easy to go, well, this is what Paul says, and Paul is the most important. So if James says something different than Paul, then obviously James is wrong because Paul is more inspired than everybody else. Now, we do this. Scholars call it having a canon within a canon, not boom kind of canon, but canon can also mean a rule. And we all have a canon within a canon, which just means that there are certain parts of the Bible that we like better than others. There are certain parts that we pay attention to and certain parts that we just ignore. We tend to pay attention to the parts we like, and we tend to ignore the parts that we don't like. So we all do this. So the danger is to go, Paul is more inspired than James is. But it goes even deeper than that, because on a very practical level, most of us believe that Paul is more inspired than Jesus is. And the reason I know this is because we just got through teaching through the Gospels. And we just got through, in the midst of doing that, we taught on the Sermon on the Mount. And we spend an awful lot of time in the Sermon on the Mount going, well, this is what Jesus said, but he can't really mean that. What he really meant is you don't have to do anything, just let me love you. That's what Jesus is really saying. I mean, it's so much easier to do Paul than it is to do Jesus, because Jesus is so radical in what he calls us to do. And so we kind of explain Jesus away. We like Paul much better. I mean, can Jesus be serious when he says, sell all your things and give them to the poor? I mean, we much prefer Paul, who goes, get a job. So there's a danger in assuming that Paul is more inspired than James or more inspired than Jesus. But there's also a danger in the doctrine of salvation by grace through faith. And that is that we have a tendency to take ourselves off the hook of ever having to do anything in response to what God has done for us in Jesus. I'm saved by grace. I can't earn it. Therefore, what I do or I don't do, it doesn't matter at all. Praise the Lord. And this is why James is really important, because James is going to help us understand what faith really is. And that's the question. What does faith look like? Or another way of stating it, what does following Jesus really require? Does it require more than just saying the sinner's prayer and believing certain things? Is that really what faith is? Now, James is a pastor. James is the first pastor. James is the first pastor of the first Christian church. So James, with the power of the Holy Spirit, is trying to create a transformed community that has the characters and the priorities of Jesus. So what James is really after is he is devoted to the way of Jesus, to living out the way that Jesus lived his life. It's not just the teachings of Jesus. And that's an important distinction between the teachings of Jesus and the way of Jesus, because everybody likes Jesus. Nobody doesn't like Jesus. But people like Jesus for certain things. Jesus was a great teacher. Jesus was a great moral authority. But the problem is you have to take Jesus on his own terms. You can't separate Jesus as a great teacher from the claims of who Jesus said that he was. You can't just take part of that. So it's important to think about living like Jesus lived, picking up the lifestyle of Jesus, and not just the teaching of Jesus, which, as we already said, we pick and choose the stuff that we like and ignore the stuff that we don't. It's not enough to believe something about Jesus. Belief in Jesus requires change. Now, is believing the right thing or having correct doctrine important? Well, sure. But correct doctrine is not what saves someone. In fact, when it comes to correct doctrine, you can be so right that you're wrong. And verse 19 points this out explicitly. You believe that there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that. Yay for you. So it's not about just what you believe. So when James says in verse 14, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds, can such faith save them? And verse 17, in the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. What he's saying is that you've got to do more than just believe in your head. The belief that you have in your head has to motivate you to actually do something. And this is another hallmark of James. Not only is he concerned about the way of Jesus, he really picks up on the teachings of Jesus. And this is because James is Jesus's brother. And he's probably heard this stuff ever since he was little. Like, think about your family of origin. Maybe in your family of origin, you played fireman. I think in Jesus's family, they played church. So James has heard this stuff over and over again. So he knows what Jesus is really thinking. And when he's talking about, faith without works is dead, he's really referring earlier in the chapter to verse 8, which was in Angela's sermon last week, where he talks about fulfilling the royal law. And the royal law is the greatest commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus himself links together what you believe and what you do. Love God, and loving God should cause you to love your neighbor too. Jesus goes on in Matthew 17 to talk about it further when he says, a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. In other words, if you say that you're a follower of Jesus and are a good tree, what fruit are you producing? Because the fruit that you produce will show whether or not your faith is real. And John picks up on that in 1 John and says, whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command, anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. Because faith without a concern for others is just self-interest. That's why Jesus emphasizes, love God, love your neighbor. And it's also good to remember that in Paul's Ephesian passage, the very next verse is, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. If you say you believe in God, the proof of your faith is in the pudding, or the fruit is on the tree. So I don't really see a disagreement between James and Paul and Jesus. Faith, if it's real, should produce change in your life. If there's no change, there's no real faith. That's the controversy. The next is the context. So James is forming this Christian community, and he's into the way of Jesus. And so now he's going to give us a case study about what this should look like. That's verse 15. Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? It's getting back to the beginning of the sermon. I can tell you I care about you all I want to, but until I actually do something caring towards you, it doesn't mean anything, does it? So Nicole and I have been laughing this past week because we're getting ready to send our middle schoolers to Washington Family Camp down in Oregon, which I think is interesting. And so they sent a sheet of what you can and what you can't pack, which is good for middle schoolers because they need to be reminded to bring deodorant. So there's all these kinds of things that you would expect that you need to bring to camp. But there's two unexpected things that you are not allowed to bring to Washington Family Camp if you are on the middle school retreat. You are not allowed to bring a refrigerator or an air conditioner. And Nicole and I were laughing about this because all rules are put into place because somebody did something. And somebody else went, there should be a rule against that. So it's kind of like that here. James is bringing this up. If you see a brother and sister in need and you're just like, God bless you, go. He's bringing that up because that's what people are doing. It's not a hypothetical. People in James's church actually believe it's okay to ignore people's needs. Now, can you imagine a church that isn't characterized by love and mercy and grace? Well, yeah. But this blows James's mind. James is like, how can those of us who have received so much from God turn around and just ignore other people in our midst? And that's why James says, so you say, well, my gift is faith. Maybe yours is action. I'll pray for them. You go do something about that. No. Faith and action, two sides of the same coin. And that's why James gives this case study. So this is someone that you know. This is a member of the community. This is not a nameless, faceless, suffering person because we find that overwhelming. There is so much need in our community, let alone the world, that we look at that and we go, how in the world, what can I do that would possibly make a difference? And we get overwhelmed by that and we don't even know where to start. So this is not that. This is a person that we know and they have a need. And I love this because 2,000 years before Abraham Maslow, James picks up on Maslow's hierarchy of need, and he says, this person has a need that is absolutely fundamental. It's on the bottom of his hierarchy. They need food. They need something to keep warm. This is not somebody who can't afford to go to Maui this year. This is someone who might freeze to death tonight. It's the most basic of needs that James says this brother or sister has. So what is the response of the person of faith? Go in peace, keep warm, be fed. With what? How? It's just this useless platitude. It's not helpful. It's like when you're having an argument and your spouse says, just calm down. It ain't helpful. So this person has needs, and this person says, be warm, be fed, go in peace. It's not helpful. So the first issue oftentimes is simply seeing the need. And a lot of the time, the trick is just recognizing that there are other people alive in the world around us. But in this instance, the person sees the need, they see the person, they just can't be bothered to help. So then the second step is being moved by the need. Yeah, you can't fix everything, but generally you can help with the need that is standing right in front of you. Here's a brother or sister in need. You're a person of faith. What's the response of faith? So let's talk about our community for a minute, because there are so many things that we do well, like CMJ Sunday, like the backpacks, the food backpacks that we're going to collect. Those are just things we do this morning. We do tons of stuff like that. We have a benevolence fund, and it's well-funded, and we help a lot of people. When kids in our community need coats, we buy them. When camps need workers or help cleaning up, we send that. When seniors in our community need rides or help, we help. When someone needs a mentor, we have people who will step up. And a lot of you are just out there freelancing, being the hands and feet of Jesus in your community with needs that you see. As a community, we care deeply. We want to make a difference. We want our faith to impact our community. We really want to be a place where our stated beliefs, our faith, the fact that we say we are followers of Jesus really makes a difference in the lives of other people. So, yay us, well done us. So, if we're so good at this, why are you all getting the sense that I'm going to keep talking about this? And the reason is Luke chapter 12, to whom much is given, much is required. So what's the challenge for us? Even though we do really, really well, the challenge for us is, how are we going to respond to God? How are we going to respond to what God has done for us? It's not just that God has given us Jesus. All good gifts come from God. Your friends, your family, your resources, your job, the things around you, all of those gifts come from God, and God is given to most of us extravagantly. How will we respond to that? And the question that I just kept posing in my mind this week is, are we occasionally generous, or are we generous people? Because there's a difference. And is it possible that despite everything that God has given us, and we have different levels, I know that, but everybody is doing okay. Despite all that God has given us, do we live with a mentality of scarcity? Everyone in Gig Harbor is running out of money, which I think is ironic. You know, we have been given so much, and so many of us live with this mentality of scarcity. Are we generously giving our resources to God, our time, our money, our stuff that we have, our gifts? Are we generously giving those to God, or are we jealously guarding our resources? Sure, you know, if there's a need, I'll kick in $20. I'll kick in $100. You need somebody to serve? I'll go serve for an hour, and God bless you if you do that. May your numbers increase. But that's being generous occasionally. That doesn't necessarily mean you're a generous person. Because here's the thing. Here's the thing about the benevolence fund. The benevolence fund is for minor emergencies. We can cover that. What happens if someone in our body has a major emergency? And this happens from time to time. This happened several times over this past year. I'm talking like major emergency, like $500 to the benevolence fund. That's not even going to be a Band-Aid for what people are going through. I'm not going to give any examples because I don't want to make anyone feel self-conscious or to have everybody sit here and think about who I might be talking about. But if someone in our church family had a major emergency, would our response basically be, go in peace, be warm, be fed? And thank God that wasn't me. I am always proud to be married to my wife, always. But there was one time that I was probably more proud than usual. And this happened probably about 20 years ago. And she had been called, we were living in the Central Valley of California, and she'd been called over the Bay Area because her oldest friend had gotten a horrific cancer diagnosis. It was brain cancer. It was a type of cancer where there was no tumor. It was just a fog that permeated her entire brain. Her entire brain was taken over by cancer. And so Megan was over there. It was just devastating news. And Megan came home, and we sat on the couch, and we talked about it for a little while. And Megan said to me, we have to sell our house. I said, really? She said, yeah, we have to sell our house because they are not going to be able to afford the treatment that she needs. We have to sell our house. And I went, okay, we'll sell our house. Now, if you're one of those financial planning people, if you're one of those people that likes to know everything ahead of time, you think I'm the stupidest person in the entire room. But I really have a sense that had we done that, it would have all worked out. It would have been okay. Now, we didn't end up having to sell our house, but we would have. And I walk away from that going, how blessed am I? How blessed are we that we have had the type of friends that we would be willing to sell our house for? And if you have never had a friend that you would sell your house for, I kind of feel sorry for you. But what if you had a rental? What if you had a rental and somebody needed to stay there? Would you let them stay there for free until they got on their feet? Or would you say, why should that cost me money? I'll kick 10% off at the top and feel good about that. Are you generous occasionally, or are you a generous person? And that's where the two examples come in, Abraham and Rahab. So Abraham, father of the faith, and when we're talking about faith, particularly in Hebrews chapter 11, it goes back and talks about how Abraham's faith was credited to him as righteousness. So I'm sure that there were people in James's community who were going, why should we do anything? Abraham didn't have to do anything, and God said he was righteous. And so this is what James picks up on. What James says is, yes, he had faith, but his faith caused him to do something. And the thing that his faith caused him to do was incredibly costly, because Abraham was already richer than Midas, but he didn't have one thing. He just wanted an heir. And so God gives him Isaac. And then God says, I want you to sacrifice Isaac. And Abraham says, like we did with the house, okay. And like Matt prayed, Abraham didn't know that God wasn't going to take him. But he believed in God enough that he was willing to do something incredibly costly because his faith taught him that he could trust God. And that's why his faith is credited as righteousness, because he acted on his faith. And it's this thoroughly Jewish notion of righteousness. Abraham is keeping the covenant. Abraham is fulfilling the promises that he made. And if fulfilling promises that you make doesn't involve action, then I have no idea how you fulfill a promise. Abraham's faith was credited to him as righteousness because he changed the way he acted. And the same thing is true of Rahab, another really interesting story. Rahab was part of the Battle of Jericho, and she harbored the spies in her room. She hid them from people. It could have cost her her life. She lied for them. She sent them off in a different direction. She put herself out there because she believed that God was in this. So it wasn't just that she believed, it's that she acted, and she acted in an incredibly costly manner to her. So that's why James pulls out these two stories. Here are people who had a faith, but it led them to do something. And it led them to do something that was really extraordinary. And they were willing to do it because they believed in God. And they believed that God was good all of the time. And so James tells these two great stories to show the reality of faith in people's lives, what faith looks like. They have these actions that are a result of their faith that he can point to. And that's why he writes, as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. So it's not really a question of the difference between faith and action, I don't think. I think it's the difference between a dead faith and a living one. So then, finally, the challenge for us. I think the challenge is to be willing to make some adjustments in our lifestyle to live out our faith, to live the type of faith that people will tell stories about later. Maybe someday when I'm retired and I guest preach someplace, maybe I'll tell a story about you, a positive one about, how your faith caused you to act. Maybe have margin to care for other people. It's not how much money you have. It's not how much time you have. It's a matter of how your faith impacts what you have to be used by God. And sometimes it's just as easy as being an encourager or being a listener or taking somebody out for coffee or dropping tamales by or something, which you can always do at my house. Be someone whose heart can be moved by compassion. So let me ask you 3 questions. Number 1, what are 2 or 3 things that your faith in Jesus is producing in your life? Number 2, what is one area in your life where you need to move your faith into action? And number 3, what story do you hope people will tell about you and your faith one day?
Hi, thanks for watching. The people of Harbor Covenant Church really want you to know the love that God has for you, want to grow with you in faith, and want to serve alongside you, not only to help others do the same, but also to make our families and our communities better. If that sounds like something that you can get on board with, then like, follow, and drop us a comment in the video. Watch some more videos on our channel or come visit us on Sunday. You can find out more about Harbor Covenant Church at harborcov.church.